In the void between stars, where hope goes to die, a single word echoed to the council chambers. Impossible. For 400 years, that word had defined the galaxy's surrender. But on this day, one species dared to whisper a different word. Yet, the Nexus station drifted in the emptiness between galaxies, a neutral ground where no sun's light had ever touched its metal skin. Inside its crystalline halls, delegates from 53 civilizations gathered in chambers designed for beings that breathe methane, silicon dust, and pure radiation. They came in forms that defied imagination. Some were living storms of electromagnetic energy. Others were colonies of microscopic organisms forming a single consciousness. And a few were simply incomprehensible geometric patterns that existed in dimensions human minds couldn't perceive. But today, they all wore the same expression, translated through 1,000 different biological and technological interfaces. Absolute terror. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the human delegation platform, her silver hair pulled back severely, her uniform bearing the scars of atmospheric re-entry from her last evacuation. She was a woman who had watched colonies burn, who had held dying friends in her arms as enemy fire rained from the sky. Her eyes, dark and unwavering, swept across the assembly. "The answer is no," she said, her voice cutting through the translation matrix like a blade through silk. The chamber erupted. Sonic frequencies that could shatter glass. Bioluminescent displays of outrage. Chemical signals of confusion. The speaker, a creature called Morphaxis, whose body was a constantly shifting sculpture of liquid metal, raised 6 appendages for silence. Ambassador Vasquez, the translation rendered Morphaxis's thoughts into words. "You misunderstand the gravity of this moment. The Vaxian collective cannot be defeated. We are not offering capitulation as cowardice. We are offering survival." Elena's jaw tightened. She had studied the recordings. She had watched worlds die. The Vaxians weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They were a technological singularity given form. Every weapon fired at them made them stronger. Every tactic used against them became obsolete within seconds. They learned. They evolved. They adapted so perfectly that fighting them wasn't war. It was assisted suicide. "I understand perfectly," Elena replied, each word measured and deliberate. "You want humanity to surrender before the Vaxians arrive at our borders. You want us to become another tributary state in their empire. You want us to choose existence over freedom." "Yes." The shout came from the Tellurian section. Ambassador Zyrax rose, his 6 eyes blazing with an emotion that transcended species. Grief. His blue-scaled skin had turned almost white with stress. "Yes, because surviving is not a sin. My world chose to fight 7 months ago. Do you want to know what happened?" Elena said nothing. Everyone in the chamber knew what happened to the Loria. Zyrax's voice cracked as he continued. "We deployed 347 weapon systems. Plasma cannons that could vaporize moons. Temporal disruptors that could age matter by millennia. Quantum bombs that could collapse probability itself. We threw everything at them. Every technology our civilization developed over 12 million years." He paused, his breathing ragged through his translator. "The Vaxian shields adapted in real time. Every weapon we fired, they analyzed and neutralized within microseconds. By the battle's end, we were literally throwing debris at them, and it bounced off like rain on diamond. They didn't just defeat us. They made us watch as they systematically disassembled our cities, our monuments, our history. 5 billion of my people died because we believed courage could overcome mathematics." The silence that followed was profound. Elena looked down at her datapad, then back at the assembly. "How many species have engaged the Vaxian collective militarily?" she asked. Morphaxis's liquid form rippled with resignation. 79 species over 4 centuries. "And how many have won even a single engagement?" "None." "How many have inflicted lasting damage on a Vaxian vessel?" The speaker's form seemed to deflate slightly. "None." "Ambassador Vasquez, these questions serve no purpose. The facts are absolute. The Vaxians possess adaptive shield technology that exists beyond our comprehension. It doesn't just react. It predicts. It evolves faster than thought itself. They are not merely advanced. They are transcendent. Elena nodded slowly and touched her datapad. A holographic projection materialized above the chamber center, a beautiful world of purple oceans and crimson forests being systematically torn apart by beams of white-hot energy. Ships that resembled obsidian cathedrals hung in orbit, methodically erasing everything below. "This is Deloria," Elena said. "I've analyzed this recording 216 times. I've studied every tactical decision, every weapon's deployment, every moment of that battle. I wanted to understand what we're facing." "Then you comprehend why resistance is futile," Morphaxis said softly. "No," Elena replied, and for the first time, she smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent ripples of unease through the assembly. "I understand why you think resistance is futile, but I also noticed something crucial that you missed." She zoomed in on a Vaxian vessel. Every weapon system used against them was sophisticated, advanced, built on billions of years of accumulated galactic science. Energy weapons that manipulate fundamental forces, missiles that travel through folded space, biological weapons that rewrite reality at the genetic level. You threw your best at them. "And it failed catastrophically," Zyrax said bitterly. "Because you fought sophistication with sophistication," Elena countered. "You engaged them on their terms. You played the game according to rules they'd mastered eons ago." A delegate resembling a crystalline flower spoke through harmonic vibrations. "What other paradigm exists? Physics is physics. Reality is reality. The Vaxians have mastered both more completely than any civilization in recorded history." Elena's smile widened, and there was something almost predatory in it. "That's your mistake. You've been part of this galactic community for so long, you've forgotten something essential. Something humanity remembers because we've only been in space for barely 2 centuries. And what truth is that?" Morphaxis asked. "There's always another way." Elena pulled up another image. Earth's history compressed into a single timeline. Humans with stone tools. Humans with sailing ships. Humans splitting atoms. Humans walking on their moon. Humans building generation ships. "Humanity has been a spacefaring species for exactly 187 years, Elena said. "We discovered faster-than-light travel 32 years ago. By your standards, we're infants playing with our parents' tools. We understand maybe 5% of the technology we use. Then how can you possibly hope to?" "But we have something for centuries of losing has made you forget," Elena interrupted. "We have ignorance. We're too inexperienced to know when something is impossible. When the universe tells us we can't do something, we hear it as suggestion, not a law." The chamber erupted again, but this time confusion mixed with the outrage. Elena raised her hand. "I don't mean this as self-deprecation. I mean it as tactical assessment. Humanity has a catastrophic flaw in our psychology. We refuse to accept reality when reality tells us we've lost. When experts tell us something cannot be done, we find someone ignorant enough to try anyway. When the rules guarantee failure, we rewrite the rules. The Vaxians cannot be defeated by rewriting rules," Zyrax protested. "They can only be defeated by superior technology, and we possess nothing they haven't already surpassed." "You possess nothing," Elena agreed. "But perhaps you're looking for the wrong kind of superiority." She pulled up a final image, Earth's moon, and on its far side, 12 massive construction installations glowing with frantic activity. Thousands of vessels swarm around them like cells in a living organism. For the past 20 months, since we learned the Vaxians had marked humanity for assimilation, we've been working on something. 12 projects, each one based on a different principle. Some use physics you consider settled science. Some use theories your civilizations abandoned as dead ends millennia ago. And some... She paused for effect. Some use concepts so primitive, so fundamentally crude, that no advanced species would ever lower themselves to consider them. Morphaxis leaned forward, their liquid form rippling with curiosity. "What kind of weapons are you constructing?" "That information is classified," Elena said flatly. "But I can tell you this. We're not trying to beat the Vaxians at their own game. We're not building better adaptive shields or faster quantum computers. We're changing the game entirely. We're bringing weapons to this fight that exist outside their experience, outside their prediction models, outside the very framework they use to understand warfare. A delegate with 4 eyes and crystalline skin stood. Ambassador Vasquez, I appreciate your species' optimism, but hope alone cannot stop Vaxian warships. Even if your weapons are unconventional, their adaptive systems will analyze and neutralize them. They always do. Maybe, Elena said, or maybe their adaptation algorithms can only process threats they can categorize. Maybe if we hit them with something that doesn't fit into any classification system they've ever encountered, something that violates the assumptions built into their predictive models, we can hurt them. And if you fail, Zyrax asked quietly, if your weapons prove ineffective, then the Vaxians will destroy Earth, just as they destroyed Deloria. My species will end. 4 billion humans will die screaming. The chamber fell silent. But if that's our fate, Elena continued, her voice hardening into steel, we'll meet it fighting. We'll meet it trying every insane, desperate, statistically improbable strategy we can conceive. Because that's what humanity does. We don't surrender. We don't accept inevitability. And we absolutely refuse to go extinct quietly. She looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes, sensors, and consciousness fields as she could. I'm not asking you to fight beside us. I'm not asking you to risk your civilizations for a plan that might fail spectacularly. All I'm asking is time. Give us a chance to try. If we succeed, perhaps we can turn this war around. If we fail, you can surrender then, and at least you'll know that every possibility was exhausted. Morphaxis was silent for a long moment, their forms cycling through colors Elena's translator helpfully labeled as contemplation, fear, and hope. Finally, they spoke. The Vaxian Armada is currently subjugating the Outer Rim. Intelligence suggests they'll redirect toward human space within 18 standard months. Can your projects be ready? They'll have to be, Elena said simply. Then we will wait. Morphaxis decided. We will not surrender yet. But Ambassador Vasquez, understand this with absolute clarity. If your weapons fail, if the Vaxians destroy Earth, the rest of the galaxy will immediately accept their terms. We cannot allow more worlds to burn for false optimism. Understood, Elena said, and thank you. As the session ended and delegates began filing out, Zyrax approached Elena. The Thalorian looked older than he had at the meeting's start, as if remembering his world's death had physically aged him. I hope you're right, Zyrax said quietly. I hope your weapons work. Because if they don't, your people will learn what mine learned. They'll learn that some enemies are mathematical certainties, no matter how brave the opposition. Elena placed a hand on the alien's shoulder, feeling the cool scales beneath her palm. Maybe you're right, she said, but if humanity is going to die anyway, I'd rather we die attempting the impossible than die accepting someone else's declaration that we're too weak to matter. Zyrax nodded slowly and walked away. Elena stood alone in the emptying chamber, looking at the hologram of the construction sites. 12 projects. 12 desperate gambles against a mathematically unbeatable enemy. She touched her communicator. Vasquez to Earth Command. The Assembly has given us our window. Status on projects. The reply came immediately, the voice of General Morrison crackling through. All 12 are on schedule, Ambassador. The science team say 4 of them might actually work. The rest they're calling theoretically questionable. Perfect, Elena said with a slight smile. The Vaxians have seen theoretically sound. Let's show them theoretically questionable. She left the assembly and boarded her shuttle back to Earth. Behind her, the galaxy watched and waited. Some with hope, some with pity, all with certainty. Humanity was about to learn a brutal lesson about the real universe. They had no idea humanity was about to teach one instead. On the far side of Earth's moon, 12 massive construction installations continued their work without pause. Engineers and scientists from every human colony worked in rotating shifts that never stopped. The installations didn't have names, only numbers. Project 1 through Project 12. Some made sense to the people building them. Others seemed like fever dreams given form. But they all had one thing in common. None of them followed established galactic warfare doctrine. In Laboratory 7 of Installation 3, Dr. Marcus Chin stared at the equations on his holographic display and felt his mind rebelling against what they described. According to every physical law of the galaxy, it confirmed over billions of years of observation, what he was building shouldn't work. The energy requirements exceeded theoretical maximums. The structural integrity would fail before activation. The targeting system relied on mathematics that most species had proven impossible centuries ago. But the test results said it would work anyway. He touched the massive machine before him, a cannon that looked like it was built from nightmares and desperation. This wasn't elegant. It wasn't sophisticated. It was barely controlled chaos wrapped in military-grade alloy. It was also going to punch a hole through the fabric of space-time itself. "I hope you work," he whispered to the machine, "because if you don't, we're all dead." Across the moon's surface, 11 other teams labored on 11 other impossible weapons. Some would work, some would fail, but all of them represented humanity's fundamental refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. The Vaxians were coming. They had conquered 79 species. They had won every battle for 400 years. Their adaptive shields had never failed. They were about to meet a species that didn't care about their track record. The galaxy said no weapon could break the Vaxians. Humanity was building 12 that would. 20 months had passed since Ambassador Elena Vasquez made her promise to the Interstellar Assembly. 20 months of relentless work, catastrophic failures, and breakthroughs that violated everything the galaxy thought it knew about physics. Now, in a secure briefing complex carved deep beneath the Himalayas, the results of that work were about to be unveiled. Fleet Admiral Kenji Tanaka stood at the front of the cavernous chamber, his weathered face betraying the fact that he hadn't slept properly in weeks. Around him sat representatives from every major human military branch, lead scientists from each project, and observers from 14 alien species courageous enough, or desperate enough, to witness what humanity had wrought. The chamber itself was a marvel. Walls lined with quantum-encrypted displays, atmospheric zones separated by invisible force fields to accommodate oxygen breathers, methane breathers, and species that require hard vacuum. In the center, a massive holographic projector waited silently. Distinguished guests, colleague, and allies, Tanaka began, his voice steady despite exhaustion. "What you're about to see is classified at the highest possible level. Some of you will think we've lost our minds. Others will believe we're wasting resources on fantasies. I ask only that you witness the entire presentation before rendering judgment." He activated the holographic display. The image that materialized was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. 12 different weapons, each one radically different from the others. Some resembled ships. Some looked like missiles. One appeared to be a station. Another looked like nothing more than a metal lattice floating in space. One seemed to be a solid block of something that shouldn't exist. "These are humanity's 12 answers to the Vaxian problem," Tanaka said. "Each weapon operates on a different fundamental principle. Each one attacks Vaxian adaptive shields in a manner that has never been attempted in recorded galactic history. We call them Projects 1 through 12, but they also have operational designations." He highlighted the first weapon, a massive railgun extending from a power core that looked like it belonged to a star. "Project 1, Ragnarok Strike. This is a relativistic kinetic impactor. It accelerates a depleted uranium slug to 99.6% of light speed. The Vaxian shields function by analyzing incoming threats and modifying their defensive frequencies in real time. But Ragnarok Strike moves so impossibly fast that the interval between detection and impact is less than a picosecond. Their adaptive systems don't have time to adapt before a projectile arrives." A Thalorian observer raised a clawed hand. "Kinetic weapons have been attempted. The Vaxian shield stopped them effortlessly. Conventional kinetic weapons travel at a few kilometers per second," explained Dr. Marcus Chun, stepping forward. He was a thin man with sharp eyes and graying temples. "Ragnarok Strike travels at nearly 300,000 kilometers per second. At that velocity, even a small projectile carries more kinetic energy than a thermonuclear device. The shields would need to adapt instantaneously, and according to our analysis of every recorded Vaxian engagement, they require at least 0.0001 seconds to fully recalibrate. We're hitting them in 0.00001 seconds." Tanaka moved to the second weapon, a missile, but one filled with crystalline structures that seemed to fold space around themselves. Project 2, Phantom Protocol. This exploits quantum entanglement. We create pairs of particles in linked quantum states, then physically separate them. One remains in the missile's primary core. The other is embedded in a secondary warhead. When the missile penetrates Vaxian shield perimeter, we detonate the particle inside the primary warhead. Because of quantum entanglement, the detonation affects both particles simultaneously across any distance. The entangled particle in the secondary warhead explodes while that warhead is still outside the shield envelope. But because the particles share quantum states, the explosion manifests inside the shield as well. Absolute silence filled the chamber. Finally, a Morphean observer spoke, their liquid metal form rippling with what the translator identified as profound skepticism. That violates the principle of locality. Information cannot propagate faster than light. The principle of locality is a guideline based on observation, not an absolute law. Dr. Chen replied calmly. And quantum entanglement doesn't transmit information in the classical sense. It transfers quantum states. The Vaxian shields are engineered to intercept objects moving from outside their perimeter to inside. They're not designed to counter threats that are simultaneously inside and outside because they exist in superposition. Admiral Tanaka continued systematically through the arsenal. Chronos' hammer used artificial gravity generation to create a localized space-time distortion. It would literally fold space around a Vaxian vessel, compressing it from all vectors simultaneously. The shields couldn't adapt because they would be responding to the ship's own mass pressing inward from dimensions the shields weren't designed to protect. Causality cage was perhaps the most disturbing. It employed experimental quantum temporal technology to sever a region of space from the normal flow of time. Anything caught in the cage would experience temporal dilation at catastrophic levels. A Vaxian ship might subjectively experience 10,000 years in 5 seconds, aging to cosmic dust instantaneously. Singularity Lance was more straightforward. It generated a beam of gravitational force so intense that it would compress matter at the subatomic level. Vaxian shields intercepted energy and matter, but gravity wasn't either. It was geometric distortion of spacetime itself, and you can't shield against geometry. Synaptic cascade targeted the Vaxians themselves rather than their technology. It broadcast a signal that interfered with neural pathways. The Vaxians operated through a distributed consciousness network linking all their ships. This weapon would transform that connection into a feedback loop, effectively paralyzing their crews with their own thoughts. Absolute Anchor utilized theoretical exotic matter to fix a region of space relative to the absolute reference frame of the universe. A ship struck by this weapon would continue moving at its current velocity relative to absolute space, but absolute space itself was in motion due to cosmic expansion. The ship would appear to accelerate randomly in impossible directions, tearing itself apart through sheer momentum. Phase nullifier altered the quantum phase of matter, temporarily preventing atoms from interacting with each other. A Vaxian ship hit by this weapon would simply disintegrate at the molecular level as its structure literally forgot how to hold itself together. Void tap accessed the quantum vacuum itself, extracting energy from the zero-point field and channeling it into a directed emission. The beam carried so much power that it could overwhelm any shield through sheer brute force. The problem was each discharge had a 43% probability of creating a micro black hole. They were still refining that particular issue. Neural shatter was designed to overload the Vaxian consciousness network with cascading information, effectively giving their entire fleet a catastrophic stroke simultaneously. Entropy reversal did exactly what its name suggested. It locally reversed the second law of thermodynamics. Anything in its effect radius would experience negative entropy, causing molecular structures to spontaneously reorganize into lower energy states. Complex machines would simplify into their component elements. And then there was Project 12. Tanaka paused noticeably before describing it. Project 12 doesn't have an operational name yet. It remains highly experimental, and we're uncertain of its efficacy. But if it functions as theorized, it will end the war permanently. He displayed the schematic. A missile, but the warhead section was filled with quantum computational systems instead of explosives. Dr. Chen stepped forward again, and for the first time, his expression showed something like discomfort. Project 12 is a consciousness virus, he explained quietly. The Vaxians operate through a distributed intelligence network. Every ship, every warrior, every system is connected via quantum-entangled communication channels that cannot be intercepted or jammed by conventional means. We've engineered a computer virus that can travel along quantum-entangled pathways. Once a single Vaxian ship is infected, the virus propagates to every other connected node instantaneously, across any distance, through any barrier. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It doesn't destroy their systems. It doesn't kill them. Instead, it does something more permanent. It severs a consciousness network and forces each Vaxian into individual awareness. It transforms them from a unified collective intelligence into separate, discrete entities experiencing consciousness alone for the first time. The chamber erupted in shocked outcry. A Thalorian delegate stood, his scales pale with outrage. You're discussing fundamental alteration of a species at the neurological level. That's not warfare. That's genocide of the mind. The Vaxians aren't purely biological, Dr. Chen said, his voice remaining level. They're hybrid entities, organic neural tissue integrated with quantum computational matrices through technological interfaces. This weapon targets the interfaces, not the biology. And yes, it will change them fundamentally. It will make them individuals instead of a unified consciousness. We consider that an acceptable alternative to extinction. You consider destroying their entire civilization acceptable? The Thalorian demanded. I consider it superior to them destroying ours, Tanaka interjected coldly. Project 12 is our final contingency. We deploy it only if all 11 other weapons prove insufficient. But make absolutely no mistake. If we must choose between Vaxian civilization and ours, we choose ours. Every time, without hesitation. He looked around the chamber, his gaze hard. I know some of you find these weapons morally troubling. I know they don't comply with established warfare conventions. But the Vaxians didn't comply with those conventions when they exterminated Deloria. They didn't comply when they destroyed 79 civilizations over 4 centuries. We're fighting for survival, and in survival, there's only one rule: win. Captain Yuki Ishikawa stood from the back of the chamber, a compact woman with cybernetic enhancements visible along her left arm and the side of her face, souvenirs from a battle she'd barely survived. She was also the finest combat pilot in the human fleet. I've tested 4 of these weapons in simulation, Ishikawa said, her voice carrying easily despite its quiet tone. Ragnarok Strike, Phantom Protocol, Chronos Hammer, and Causality Cage. I can confirm they function. They're dangerous, unpredictable, and absolutely nothing like conventional weapons. But they work. The question isn't whether we can damage the Vaxians. The question is whether we can damage them severely enough to alter their strategic calculus. We don't need to annihilate them completely, Tanaka said. We need only inflict sufficient casualties that they determine humanity isn't worth the cost of conquest. If we can make them bleed, make them fear, make them understand that subjugating us will cost more than they're prepared to pay, then we achieve victory. He displayed a star chart. According to intelligence, the Vaxian Armada is currently 18 months from human space. They're completing their subjugation of the Outer Rim, methodically eliminating any resistance. Once finished, they'll redirect their full attention toward us. A human general objected. 18 months isn't sufficient time to mass-produce these weapons. Most remain prototypes. We have perhaps 12 to 20 units of each design, nowhere near enough to equip a full fleet. Then we employ them strategically, Tanaka replied. We don't engage the Vaxians in conventional fleet actions. We use asymmetric tactics, hit-and-run strikes, ambushes, surgical attacks. We test our weapons against their scouts and isolated vessels. We learn what functions and what doesn't. And if fortune favors us, we learn how to mass-produce successful designs before the primary armada arrives. Dr. Chen added, we're also prepared to share these technologies with allied species. The Interstellar Assembly has expressed interest in several projects. If other civilizations begin manufacturing these weapons, we multiply our effective firepower exponentially. You'd share this technology? A crystalline observer asked in surprise. even though it provides you strategic advantage? Strategic advantage is meaningless if we lose the war, Tanaka replied simply. We prefer to share the technology and win collectively than hoard it and lose alone. The briefing continued for another 4 hours. Each project team presented their data, explained their theoretical foundations, and fielded questions. Some explanations were comprehensible. Others sounded like madness given voice. But every team could demonstrate that their weapon functioned, at least under controlled test conditions. As the meeting concluded and attendees began departing, several alien observers approached Tanaka. Admiral, a question. The Morphean said, their liquid form cycling through colors. Why 12 separate weapons? Why not concentrate all resources on the most promising design? Tanaka smiled slightly. Because we don't know which will prove effective in actual combat. Vaxian shields are adaptive. They might counter Ragnarok Strike, but fail against Phantom Protocol. They might neutralize Singularity Lands, but remain vulnerable to Phase Nullifier. By developing 12 weapons based on 12 different principles, we ensure they cannot adapt to all simultaneously. Even if 11 weapons fail, the 12th might succeed. That approach seems inefficient, a Thalorian noted. It disperses your resources excessively. It's also fundamentally human, Tanaka replied. We have a saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. We'd rather have 12 possible solutions than one perfect solution that might prove ineffective. As the alien observers departed, Ishikawa approached Tanaka. Do you genuinely believe this will work, Admiral? Tanaka was silent for a moment, staring at the hologram still displaying all 12 weapons. I believe it must work, Captain, because the alternative is extinction, and I'm not prepared to let humanity end without attempting the impossible. Neither am I, Ishikawa agreed, looking at the display. These weapons are insane. They're reckless. Half of them violate physics as we understand it. And that's precisely why they might succeed, Tanaka said. The Vaxians have fought 79 species. All those species employed conventional weapons based on conventional science. We're offering them something unconventional, something they've never encountered, something that doesn't conform to the paradigms they expect. He touched the hologram, rotating it. Somewhere out there, the Vaxians are advancing. They believe they're invincible. They believe no weapon can penetrate their shields. They're about to discover they're mistaken. Because humans don't play by the rules, Ishikawa said. Because we rewrite them, Tanaka finished. 3 weeks later, Captain Yuki Ishikawa stood on the bridge of the UHS Indomitable, watching Saturn's rings create a river of gold and ice across the view screen. The gas giant dominated the vista, its perpetual storm swirling hypnotically. But Ishikawa wasn't admiring the scenery. She was focused on the 400 Vaxian warships that had just translated into the outer solar system. Status report, Ishikawa commanded, her voice betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through her system. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim looked up from her tactical console, her hands trembling slightly. Vaxian Vanguard fleet holding position at Jupiter's orbital path. 400 capital ships, estimated crew of 300,000. They're conducting system scans but not advancing. They're exercising caution, Commander Hassan al-Rashid said from the engineering station. They're aware we're here. They're waiting to observe our response. Ishikawa nodded slowly. The Indomitable wasn't alone. Around them, 41 human warships maintained formation near Saturn's orbital stations. It was the entire defensive fleet of the outer solar system. Against 400 Vaxian ships, it should have been a massacre. But today, humanity had brought new pieces to the board. Load Ragnarok Strike, Ishikawa ordered. Prepare firing solution on the Vaxian flagship. Ragnarok Strike loaded, Kim confirmed. Targeting the command vessel. Power at maximum. Ready to fire on your command, Captain. Ishikawa studied the tactical display. The Vaxian ships maintained perfect formation, undoubtedly running comprehensive scans to analyze human defenses. They'd executed this pattern hundreds of times against other species. Scan, adapt, annihilate. It was their standard doctrine. Today, that doctrine would shatter. Fire Ragnarok Strike. Ishikawa said quietly. The Indomitable shuddered slightly. Deep in its core, capacitors discharged unimaginable energy into a magnetic acceleration rail that extended half the ship's length. A depleted uranium slug the size of a human fist was accelerated to 99.6% of light speed in less than a second. Then it was gone, vanishing into the void. On the view screen, nothing appeared to happen for a heartbeat. Then the Vaxian flagship, a massive obsidian structure that resembled a geometric nightmare, simply exploded. One instant existed. The next, it was an expanding sphere of superheated debris and ionized gas. The bridge of the Indomitable fell silent. Kim stared at her console, her expression shocked. Direct hit. The flagship is completely destroyed. Their shields never even activated. They activated, Al-Rashid corrected, checking his readings. I detected the energy spike, but the projectile was moving so fast it impacted before the shields could analyze the threat and recalibrate. Time between detection and impact, 0.003 seconds. Insufficient time for adaptation. Ishikawa allowed herself a small smile. One down. Load Phantom Protocol. Target the vessel to the flagship's starboard side. Let's see if this one works as well. The Vaxian fleet was no longer maintaining formation. Ships were scattering, their shields flaring to full power. Weapons ports were cycling open. They hadn't anticipated losing their command ship in the first second of engagement. Phantom Protocol loaded. Kim reported, firing. This time, the weapon was visible, a bright streak across space. The missile flew toward the Vaxian vessels, and as it approached shield range, the Vaxians responded. Energy beams lanced out, attempting to destroy the incoming threat. Their shields intensified, preparing to deflect it. The missile entered shield range and immediately detonated. The explosion was modest, barely noticeable against the backdrop of space. The Vaxian ship's shields flared brilliantly, but held. The ship appeared undamaged for exactly 3 seconds. Then the ship exploded from within. A massive detonation tore through its superstructure, ripping it apart from bow to stern. Debris fountained outward in all directions. How? Al-Rashid demanded, staring at his sensors. The missile detonated outside their shields. The explosion couldn't possibly have reached them. Quantum entanglement, Ishikawa explained. The missile carried 2 warheads with entangled particles. When the first warhead detonated outside the shields, the quantum linkage caused the second warhead, inside, to detonate simultaneously. The shields never detected it because it was already internal. That's impossible, Kim whispered. Tell the Vaxians, Ishikawa replied. All ships weapons-free. Engage with everything available. Let's see how well their shields handle multiple threat vectors simultaneously. The human fleet opened fire. 41 ships unleashed every weapon in their arsenals. Space between Saturn and Jupiter erupted in energy beams, missiles, and kinetic rounds. The Vaxian fleet responded with brutal efficiency, their weapons tearing into human formations. 4 human ships exploded in the first exchange, then 6 more. The Vaxians were veteran warriors, but they were also dying. A third Vaxian ship exploded as another Ragnarok strike round punched through its shields at relativistic velocity. A 4th ship went dark as a Phantom Protocol detonated inside its engineering core. A 5th ship began tumbling wildly as its maneuvering systems catastrophically failed. They're adapting, Kim warned. Vaxian shields are beginning to react faster. The last Ragnarok strike was partially deflected. It damaged a ship but didn't destroy it. Expected, Ishikawa said. They can adapt to anything if they observe it repeatedly, but they cannot adapt to everything simultaneously. Load causality cage. Target that damaged vessel. Captain, causality cage is still experimental, Al-Rashid objected. We don't have complete data on. Then we'll acquire that data now. Fire when ready. The causality cage launched from one of the escort ships, a frigate designated Retribution. The weapon resembled a large metallic sphere covered in crystalline projectors. It flew toward the damaged Vaxian ship in a straight trajectory, not attempting evasion. Vaxian weapons fired at it. Energy beams struck its surface. Kinetic rounds slammed into its hull, but the sphere continued forward, its shields absorbing the punishment. When it reached the Vaxian ship, the sphere stopped. Then it activated. Space itself seemed to ripple around the Vaxian vessel, a visual distortion like heat shimmer but on a cosmic scale. For a moment, nothing appeared to happen. Then the ship began to deteriorate. Metal corroded in seconds. Hull plating flaked away like old paint. Internal systems failed as their components degraded. The ship was experiencing centuries of time in mere seconds, aging into obsolescence while the rest of the universe watched in normal time. In 20 seconds, the Vaxian warship became a cloud of rust and debris. Holy hell, Al-Rashid breathed. We just aged them to death. They were disconnected from normal temporal flow, Ishikawa explained. From their perspective, they experienced approximately 10,000 years in 20 seconds. Everything inside that bubble aged normally. Everything outside remained in standard time. Result: a very old, very dead ship. The Vaxian fleet was now in full panic. Ships were breaking formation, attempting to retreat to safe distance. But the human fleet wasn't permitting easy escape. More Ragnarok strikes fired. More phantom protocols detonated. A second causality cage activated, transforming another Vaxian ship into ancient debris. Then the Vaxians altered tactics. Instead of fighting, they began positioning themselves behind human orbital stations, using civilian habitats as shields. Vaxian ships placed themselves behind population centers, forcing humanity to either cease fire or risk killing their own people. Cowards, Kim spat. They're hiding behind civilians. Ishikawa's jaw tightened. This was the Vaxian contingency plan. If they couldn't achieve clean victory, they'd force their enemies to choose between surrender and mass civilian casualties. It had worked against dozens of species before. All ships, cease fire, Ishikawa ordered reluctantly. We cannot risk the stations. The firing stopped. The Vaxian ships were damaged but functional. They'd lost 63 ships out of 400. Not a decisive defeat, but more casualties than they'd suffered in the past century combined. And they'd achieved it by using human civilians as shields. On the main view screen, a communication request appeared. The Vaxians rarely communicated with their targets, but apparently today was exceptional. Ishikawa accepted the request. The screen filled with the image of a Vaxian commander, a being that was more cybernetic than organic, with technological components covering most of its body. Its eyes glowed with cold blue luminescence. Human vessel. The Vaxian's voice was flat, emotionless, filtered through the translation matrix. You have developed intriguing weapons. We did not anticipate this from such a primitive species. However, you will now stand down. We hold your civilian population hostage. If you fire again, we will systematically destroy every station in this system. Ishikawa stared at the alien. You're threatening to execute civilians if we don't surrender. Correct. Your choice is binary. Surrender and exist as Vaxian subjects, or fight and witness your people die. Choose. Those aren't our only options, Ishikawa said quietly. You possess no other options. Your weapons, while effective, require unobstructed firing solutions. We are now positioned behind your infrastructure. You cannot fire without killing your own population. Ishikawa looked at her tactical officer. Lieutenant Kim, how many Vaxian ships can we engage with conventional weapons without risking the stations? Maybe 35 ships, Captain. The rest are too close to civilian structures. How long to evacuate the stations? Minimum 3 hours, Captain. And the Vaxians won't give us that time. Ishikawa nodded slowly. She looked back at the Vaxian commander. You're correct. We cannot fire our weapons without risking our civilians. So we won't fire. The Vaxian commander's expression didn't change, but there was satisfaction in its voice. You demonstrate greater wisdom than other species. You accept the inevitable. I accept that I cannot fire from here, Ishikawa agreed, but I can still fire. She turned to her crew. Helm. Full thrust toward Vaxian position. Ramming speed. Communications. Transmit orders to all ships. Anyone with clear shots, take them. Everyone else, follow us in. Captain, Kim looked confused. The Vaxians think we're trapped. They think we won't sacrifice ourselves for tactical advantage. They're mistaken. She activated the ship-wide intercom. All hands, this is a captain. We're about to do something statistically inadvisable. I won't order anyone to follow who doesn't wish to, but we have one opportunity to break this stalemate, and I'm taking it. Anyone who wants to evacuate to escape pods has 45 seconds. No one moved. Ishikawa smiled slightly. I didn't think so. Helm, engage. The Indomitable surged forward, accelerating hard toward the Vaxian ships hiding behind orbital stations. The Vaxian commander's expression finally changed, showing something like surprise. What are you doing? You will die. Maybe, Ishikawa said, but we'll take you with us. And that's acceptable. 7 other human ships broke formation and followed the Indomitable. The Vaxian ships opened fire, attempting to destroy the incoming vessels before they could close to ramming range. Energy beams tore into the Indomitable's shields, overloading them in seconds. Hull plating melted. The ship shuddered with each impact, but it kept coming. Distance the Vaxian flagship, 6 kilometers, Kim reported, her voice shaking. 5 kilometers. 4. Load final causality cage. Ishikawa ordered. 1 more shot. Let's make it count. Captain, if we fire that weapon at this range, we'll be caught in the temporal effect, Al-Rashid protested. I know. Fire anyway. The last causality cage launched from the dying Indomitable. It crossed the short distance to the Vaxian flagship and activated. Space shimmered. Time fractured. The Vaxian flagship aged instantly, transforming into cosmic junk in seconds. But the effect also caught the Indomitable in its periphery. The ship's forward section experienced accelerated time, aging and failing. Systems shut down. Hull plating crumbled, but it was sufficient. The flagship was destroyed, and with it, the coordination of the Vaxian fleet collapsed. Ships began making individual decisions instead of following unified strategy. Some tried to fight, others attempted to flee. A few even fired on their own forces by accident. The unified threat became chaos. The remaining human ships exploited confusion ruthlessly. Ragnarok rounds fired into the disorganized Vaxian formation. Phantom protocols detonated among clusters of enemy ships. Within minutes, the Vaxian vanguard was in full retreat. On the bridge of the dying Indomitable, Ishikawa watched them flee. The ship was crippled, its forward section completely destroyed, but it was still holding together, barely. Status, she asked weakly. Smoke filled the bridge. Half the consoles were dead. Vaxian fleet is retreating, Kim reported, blood running from a cut on her forehead. They're falling back beyond Jupiter. We won, Captain. We actually won. Ishikawa slumped in her chair. Around Saturn, the human fleet was in ruins. Of 41 ships, only 16 remained combat-capable. But the Vaxians had lost over 130 ships. For the first time in 400 years, the Vaxian collective had been hurt. Later, after rescue operations and damage assessments concluded, Ishikawa sat in a medical bay receiving treatment for burns and fractured ribs. Admiral Tanaka appeared on her communication screen. Exceptional work, Captain, he said. The Interstellar Assembly is stunned. They never believed the Vaxians could be defeated. We didn't defeat them, Ishikawa said tiredly. We hurt them. There's a difference. And it cost us 25 ships and 14,000 lives. If that's victory, I don't want to see defeat. Victory is whatever allows us to continue fighting, Tanaka replied. You proved our weapons work. Ragnarok Strike works. Phantom Protocol works. Causality Cage works. Now we know what we're facing, and we can prepare. Can we? Ishikawa asked. The Vaxians adapted to our weapons by the battle's end. They'll adapt further now that they understand what to expect. We surprised them once. We won't surprise them again. Then we deploy the other weapons. Tanaka said, Projects 4 through 12 are ready for deployment. And, Captain, the Vaxians just learned something critical. They learned they can be hurt. They learned they can die. For 4 centuries they believed themselves invincible. Now they know better. Ishikawa nodded slowly. What about the main armada? This was just their vanguard fleet. According to intelligence, the main armada has altered course. They're no longer heading directly to Earth. They're taking a longer route, gathering additional ships, preparing for genuine warfare. We hurt them, Captain. We hurt them severely enough that they're exercising caution. That buys us time. How much time? 5 months, perhaps 6. Sufficient to build more weapons. Sufficient to train more crews. Sufficient to share our technology with other species prepared to fight. Tanaka leaned forward. The galaxy has been losing for 4 centuries, Captain Ishikawa. They'd forgotten what victory looks like. You just reminded them. Ships from 8 different species have contacted us requesting Ragnarok strike specifications. The Thalorians want Phantom Protocol technology. Even neutral species are asking if they can contribute. All because we won one battle. No, Tanaka corrected. Because you proved the Vaxians can be beaten. Hope is a powerful weapon. Captain, sometimes it's the most powerful weapon of all. Ishikawa looked out the window of the medical bay. In the distance, repair crews worked on damaged ships. Beyond them, Saturn continued its eternal rotation, indifferent to the battle fought in its shadow. Admiral, when can we launch the next operation? When you're healed and when we have more weapons ready. But, Captain, you don't have to volunteer. You've done enough. With respect, Admiral, I haven't done nearly enough. The Vaxians are still out there. They still want to destroy us. One battle isn't sufficient. I need to keep fighting until they're gone. Or until I am. Tanaka smiled slightly. I anticipated that response. Rest and heal, Captain. When you're ready, we'll have another mission. There are 11 more weapons to test, and I can think of no one better to test them. The transmission ended. Ishikawa lay back in her medical bed, staring at the ceiling. Her body ached. Her ship was destroyed. Thousands were dead, but the Vaxians were retreating. For the first time in 400 years, the galaxy's greatest enemy had been forced to withdraw. Not destroyed, not defeated completely, but hurt, wounded, made to understand they weren't invincible. It was a beginning. 7 months after the Battle of Saturn, the galaxy looked different, not physically, but in ways that mattered more. Hope had returned. Dr. Marcus Chin stood in a massive assembly facility on the Thalorian homeworld, watching as representatives from 26 different species examine human weapons technology. The facility was designed for beings of many types. Atmospheric zones separated different areas, allowing methane breathers, oxygen breathers, and even vacuum-adapted species to collaborate in the same space. A Thalorian engineer examined a Ragnarok strike launcher with obvious fascination. The design is crude, she said to her translator, but the principle is brilliant. We've been trying to make weapons more sophisticated, more advanced. You simply made them faster. Velocity is sophistication, Chin replied with a slight smile. When you're moving at 99.6% of light speed, you don't need complicated targeting systems or adaptive warheads. You just point and fire. A Morphean scientist floated closer to examine Phantom Protocol specifications displayed on a holographic screen. The quantum entanglement remained stable. We attempted similar technology 3 centuries ago. The entangled particles always collapse when exposed to weapon-grade energy. Because you tried using naturally entangled particles, Chan explained, we create artificial entanglement using quantum crystalline matrices. The matrix maintains entanglement stability even through detonation. It's not elegant, but it functions. Nothing about human weapons is elegant, a Thalorian observer commented, though it sounded complimentary. Your approach to warfare is like your approach to everything, practical, direct, and completely unconcerned with established doctrine. This was the 4th such conference in 4 months. Humanity had opened its weapons research to anyone willing to fight the Vaxians. Not everyone supported it. Ambassador Elena Vasquez arrived at Chen's side, looking exhausted. We have a problem. The Unified Security Council is threatening to terminate the technology sharing program. On what grounds? Chen asked quietly. They argue we're surrendering our only strategic advantage. That once other species possess our weapons, they won't need us anymore. That we're making ourselves obsolete. Chen shook his head. We didn't build these weapons to hoard them. We built them to win a war, and we cannot win alone. I agree, Vasquez said. But the Council has legitimate concerns. Some species requesting our technology haven't always been friendly to humanity. The Crysalaxians fought a territorial war with us 30 years ago. The Void Collective has been undermining our trade networks for decades. Now we're supposed to trust them with weapons that could obliterate planets. They're fighting the same enemy we are, Jim pointed out. The Vaxians don't care about old territorial disputes. They'll destroy the Crysalaxians and the Void Collective just as efficiently as they destroy us. We need allies more than we need exclusive weapons. Vasquez sighed. You're right, of course. I'm just exhausted from fighting wars on multiple fronts. The Vaxians in space and the politicians on Earth. Before Chin could respond, alarms sounded throughout the facility. A holographic display in the center of the room changed from showing weapon specifications to displaying a star chart. A crimson indicator was flashing near the Arcturus cluster. What is that? A Tellurian delegate asked. Vaxian fleet movement, a human military liaison announced. His voice tight. Major force detected. Estimated at 700 ships advancing toward the Arcturus system. Our forces are requesting immediate reinforcement. 700 ships, Vasquez whispered. That's nearly double what we face at Saturn. And we have triple the forces we had at Saturn, Chin said firmly. We have the Tellurian Second Armada, the Morphean Defense Coalition, and contingents from 15 other species, all of them armed with our weapons now. He turned to the assembled delegates. This is what we've been preparing for. The Vaxians are testing us again. They want to determine if Saturn was anomalous or if we can genuinely fight them. How many of you are willing to answer that question? Every delegate in the facility raised their hand, appendage, or equivalent limb. For days later, a combined fleet of 173 ships from 19 different species arrived at the Arcturus cluster. The Vaxian fleet was already there, besieging a human mining colony on Arcturus 4. The planetary shields were failing under relentless bombardment. Captain Yuki Ishikawa, now promoted to Commodore after Saturn, commanded the human contingent from her new flagship, the UHS Vengeance. Around her, alien ships of every conceivable design held formation. Some were massive dreadnoughts covered in reactive armor. Others were small, agile frigates. All carried at least one type of human weapon. Colony status, Ishikawa asked. Shields at 26%. Lieutenant Commander Kim reported from her tactical station. She'd transferred to the Vengeance with Ishikawa, along with most of her surviving crew. They have maybe 90 minutes before the Vaxians break through. Then we don't have time for subtlety, Ishikawa said. All ships, engage at will. Deploy everything we have. Let's show the Vaxians what a unified galaxy can do. The combined fleet swept into battle. Ragnarok strike rounds fire from human and Tellurian ships, moving at impossible velocities. Phantom protocols launched from Morphean vessels, their quantum warheads flickering between states. A Crysalaxian dreadnought deployed a Singularity Lance, its gravitational beam bending space itself as it carved through Vaxian formations. The Vaxian fleet responded with practiced precision. Shields flared, weapons cycled, energy beams lanced through space. The battle devolved into chaos as hundreds of ships fired thousands of weapons. Ishikawa watched her tactical display, noting how different species had adapted human technology to their unique strengths. The Tellurians, with their mastery of energy manipulation, had modified Ragnarok strike launchers to fire plasma-coated projectiles that were even more destructive. The Morpheans, experts in quantum physics, had improved phantom protocols' entanglement stability, making it effective at longer ranges. The Vaxians are adapting, Kim warned. Their shields are beginning to deflect Ragnarok strike rounds. Not all of them, but enough to reduce effectiveness. Expected, Ishikawa replied. What about the other weapons? Singularity Lance remains effective. Phantom Protocol is working approximately 65% of the time. The Vaxians cannot adapt to both simultaneously. A Crysalaxian destroyer exploded on the view screen, torn apart by Vaxian fire. 2 more ships, one from the Void Collective and one human, followed seconds later. The Vaxians were taking losses, but they were inflicting them too. We're trading ships almost evenly, Commander Al-Rashid reported from engineering. At this rate, we'll win the engagement, but lose half our fleet. Unacceptable, Ishikawa said. Deploy the new weapons. Activate phase nullifier. A Morphean cruiser acknowledged and fired its phase nullifier. The beam was invisible to standard sensors, but its effects were immediately apparent. The Vaxian ship it struck began to shimmer. A visual distortion like reality was becoming uncertain. Then slowly, methodically, it began to disintegrate, not exploding, not burning, just coming apart as its molecular bonds simply forgot how to function. Within 45 seconds, the ship was a dispersing cloud of individual atoms drifting harmlessly through space. By the void, a Thalorian captain breathed over Fleet Channel. That's horrifying. That's survival, Ishikawa replied coldly. All ships equipped with phase nullifiers fire at will. 4 more Morphean ships and 3 Thalorian vessels fired their phase nullifiers. 6 more Vaxian ships dissolved into atomic clouds. The Vaxian fleet began withdrawing, attempting to avoid the new weapon, but Ishikawa wasn't finished. Deploy absolute anchor. A human frigate launched the experimental weapon, a device that resembled a small satellite, barely 12 meters across. It flew into the center of the Vaxian formation and activated. Suddenly, 16 Vaxian ships began moving in physically impossible directions. One ship accelerated straight up relative to galactic plane, its engines screaming as they fought against forces that shouldn't exist. Another spun wildly, its hull tearing apart from structural stress. A third seemed to fold in on itself, crushed by its own momentum moving in a direction that geometry said didn't exist. The absolute anchor fixes space relative to universal reference frame. Ishikawa explained over the Fleet Channel. But space itself is expanding. The ships are trying to maintain position in local space while being locked to absolute space. The result is catastrophic structural failure. This is madness, a Void Collective Commander transmitted. These weapons violate every principle of warfare. The Vaxians violated those principles first when they started exterminating species, Ishikawa replied. Her voice ice. We're simply responding in kind. Continue the assault. The battle raged for another 3 hours. The Vaxians fought with the desperation of beings who realized they were no longer invincible. They adapted tactics constantly, seeking ways to counter the flood of exotic weapons. But every time they adapted to one weapon, another struck from a different vector. A Ragnarok round would force them to strengthen their shields. Then a Phantom protocol would detonate inside those shields, bypassing them entirely. While they recovered, a Singularity Lance would crush their ship's structure. If they dispersed their formation to avoid area weapons, phase nullifiers would pick them off individually. If they clustered for mutual defense, absolute anchors would trap entire groups. Finally, the Vaxian fleet broke, not retreating in order, but scattering in panic. Individual ships fled in different directions, abandoning any pretense of coordination. The combined fleet pursued, destroying fleeing vessels until Ishikawa ordered them to stop. Let them escape, she said. Let them spread the word. Let every Vaxian in the galaxy know they can be beaten. As the battle concluded, casualty reports arrived. The combined fleet had lost 51 ships, 19 human vessels, 12 Thalorian, 10 Morphean, and 10 from various other species. Over 8,000 sentient beings dead. But the Vaxians had lost over 300 ships, and they had fled. In the days following the battle, something fundamental shifted across the galaxy. More species joined the anti-Vaxian coalition. Weapons development accelerated as different civilizations merged their expertise with human innovation. The Aquelians, a species living in liquid environments, developed an underwater variant of Ragnarok Strike that could be fired from ocean worlds. The Crystalline Collective, beings made of living silicate, created a weapon using resonance frequencies to shatter Vaxian hull plating. The tide was turning, but there was a cost. Dr. Marcus Chun sat in his laboratory on Luna Station, reading field reports. The weapons were performing better than projected. They were also causing more collateral damage than anticipated. Phase nullifiers left clouds of radioactive particles that would contaminate space for millennia. Absolute anchors sometimes created persistent gravitational anomalies. Causality cages had unpredictable effects on local space-time geometry. "We're poisoning the galaxy," he said quietly to Ambassador Vasquez, who had come to visit. Vasquez nodded slowly. "I know, but what alternative do we have? If we don't use these weapons, the Vaxians will conquer us. If we do use them, we win but leave scars that will take centuries to heal. There has to be a better way." "If you discover one, tell me immediately," Vasquez replied. "But until then, we use what works. The galaxy has been losing this war for 4 centuries. We're finally winning. I'll accept some environmental damage if it means we survive." Chen looked at the data again. Casualty projections, radiation levels, damaged star systems. The cost of victory was being paid in blood and ecological destruction. "What about Project 12, he asked. "The consciousness virus. If we deployed it, we could end the war without further battles." "The ethics committee rejected it," Vasquez said. "They determined that forcibly altering an entire species' consciousness constitutes genocide, even if we don't kill anyone. It's too similar to what the Vaxians have been doing, forcing conquered species into submission. So we continue fighting conventional battles with unconventional weapons until one side collapses from exhaustion. Unless you have a superior alternative." Chen didn't have a superior alternative. None of them did. They were improvising as they went, trying to balance survival with morality, victory with ethics. It was messy and complicated, and nothing like the clean scenarios in strategic simulations. A priority transmission arrived on his terminal. It was from military intelligence. "The Vaxian primary armada has been detected," he read aloud, his voice tight. 4,000 ships heading for the core worlds. Estimated arrival in 7 weeks. They're no longer targeting humanity specifically. They're targeting the heart of galactic civilization. If the core worlds fall, the rest of the galaxy falls with them. Vasquez closed her eyes. "For 1,000 ships, we barely survived against 700. Then we build more weapons." Chen said firmly, "We have 7 weeks. We can manufacture perhaps 600 additional weapons if we work continuously. Every shipyard in human space is already producing Ragnarok strike launchers. We share the designs with every species willing to build them. It won't be enough, but it might be enough to hurt them. And if it isn't enough..." Chen looked at the data for Project 12, the consciousness virus, the weapon they'd agreed not to use because it was too cruel, too permanent, too much like the enemy they fought. "Then we deploy every weapon we have," he said quietly. "Every single one. Because if the core worlds fall, there is no second chance. The galaxy either stands together now or fragments forever." Vasquez nodded slowly. "I'll inform the council. Prepare all weapons for deployment, including Project 12. We'll decide which to use when we see the battlefield. But Marcus, understand this. If we use that consciousness virus, we're no longer the heroes. We become something else. Something darker." "I know," Chen said. "But being heroes is a luxury we cannot afford right now. Right now, we just need to survive." The core worlds hung in space like jewels in a crown. 7 planets orbiting a binary star system at the heart of galactic civilization. For 15,000 years, these worlds have been the center of art, science, philosophy, and culture for hundreds of species. Archives that held knowledge spanning eons. Museums preserving the history of civilizations long extinct. Universities where the greatest minds in the galaxy came to learn and teach. Now, they were about to become the greatest battlefield in recorded history. Commodore Yuki Ishikawa stood on the bridge of the Vengeance, watching the largest fleet ever assembled take formation around the core worlds. 412 ships from 34 different species. It was everything the galaxy could spare. Every vessel that could reach the core worlds in time. Against 4,000 Vaxian warships. The mathematics were brutal. "Fleet status," Ishikawa ordered, her voice steady despite the impossible odds. "All ships report ready," Lieutenant Commander Kim replied. "We have 104 ships equipped with Ragnarok strike launchers, 63 with Phantom protocols, 38 with singularity lances, 29 with phase nullifiers, 22 with causality cages, 18 with absolute anchors, and various other weapons distributed across the fleet. The remaining ships carry conventional weapons and will provide support fire. She hesitated. And Project 12? Loaded and ready on the Revelation, Kim said quietly. Dr. Chun is standing by to deploy on your command. Ishikawa nodded slowly. The consciousness virus. The weapon they'd all agreed was too cruel to use, too permanent, too much like genocide. But if they lost this battle, cruelty wouldn't matter. Nothing would matter. Vaxian fleet entering sensor range. Commander Al-Rashid announced. Sensors confirm 4,000 capital ships. They're advancing in a standard attack formation. On the view screen, the Vaxian armada appeared, a black tide of geometric nightmares blotting out the stars. Thousands of obsidian vessels moving with perfect synchronization. Every ship in precisely the correct position. Every movement coordinated with inhuman precision. They're magnificent in a terrible way, Ishikawa said quietly, like a play given form. Perfect, efficient, unstoppable. We stopped them before, Kim said. We hurt them before, Ishikawa corrected. This time, they're not underestimating us. This time, they know what we can do. And they came anyway, with 10 times the force. That tells me they believe they can win. Can they? Al-Rashid asked. Ishikawa didn't answer immediately. She studied the tactical display, running calculations. 4,000 ships against 400, even with superior weapons. The mathematics were brutal. Maybe, she finally said, but we're going to make them pay for every meter of space. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. This is Commodore Ishikawa, to all vessels. You know the situation. You understand the odds. I won't lie and claim this will be easy. It won't be. Many of us won't survive the next hours. But I want you to remember something. She paused, choosing her words carefully. 400 years ago, the Vaxians conquered their first species. For 4 centuries, they've been unstoppable. 79 civilizations have fallen. Trillions of beings have died or been enslaved. And in all that time, no one defeated them. Until we did. Another pause. We beat them at Saturn. We beat them at Arcturus. We've shown the galaxy that the Vaxians aren't invincible. Today, we finish what we started. Today, we show them their empire ends here. Not because we have more ships. Not because we have superior technology. But because we refuse to surrender. We refuse to submit. We refuse to let them win. She looked around her bridge at her crew. Every species in this fleet is here because they chose to fight rather than kneel. That choice matters. That choice changes everything. One more pause. In a few minutes, we engage the enemy. Use every weapon you have. Fight with everything you possess. Make every shot count. And remember, we're not just fighting for the core worlds. We're fighting for every species of Vaxians destroyed. We're fighting for everyone who never got a chance to resist. We're fighting for the right of every sentient being in this galaxy to live free. That's worth dying for. That's worth everything. She closed the channel and looked at her crew. They were terrified. She could see it in their eyes. But they were also determined. All weapons armed and ready, Kim reported. Vaxian fleet entering effective range. They're maintaining formation. Give them what they expect, Ishikawa said. All Ragnarok strike launchers fire. 104 ships fired simultaneously. 104 projectiles accelerated to near-light speed, crossing the distance in heartbeats. The Vaxian fleet responded instantly. Shields flared to maximum. Their formation shifted with liquid precision. 79 Ragnarok rounds found their targets. 79 Vaxian ships exploded or were crippled, but 25 rounds were deflected or absorbed by shields that had learned from previous engagements. They've adapted, Al-Rashid said grimly. Their shields are significantly stronger than before. Then we adapt too, Ishikawa replied. All Phantom protocols, fire. All Singularity lances, fire. All phase nullifiers, fire. Hit them with everything simultaneously. The combined fleet unleashed a storm of exotic weapons. Phantom protocol missiles flickered between quantum states, detonating inside Vaxian shields. Singularity lances bent space into crushing forces. Phase nullifiers dissolved matter into atomic clouds. Causality cages aged ships to dust. Absolute anchors tore vessels apart with impossible vectors. The Vaxian fleet staggered under the assault. Hundreds of ships exploded. Thousands more were damaged, but they kept advancing. For every Vaxian ship destroyed, 9 more pressed forward. Their return fire was devastating. Energy beams tore through Allied formations, destroying ships wholesale. A Thalorian dreadnought exploded in a sphere of plasma. 3 Morphean cruisers collided as their navigation systems were destroyed. A human destroyer simply vanished as a Vaxian weapon erased it from existence. "We're losing ships faster than we're destroying theirs," Kim reported, strain evident in her voice. "At this rate, we'll be overrun in 40 minutes. Ishikawa studied the tactical display. Kim was right. They were hurting the Vaxians badly, destroying ships at a rate that would win any conventional battle. But there were simply too many enemies. The Vaxians could afford to lose 1,000 ships and still have 3,000 remaining. The Allied fleet couldn't afford to lose even 100. "Deploy all remaining causality cages," Ishikawa ordered. "Target their command vessels. If we can disrupt their coordination, we might create an opening." 14 causality cages launched, flying toward the center of the Vaxian formation where their command ships directed the battle. The Vaxians tried to intercept them, but the cages were heavily shielded. 11 reached their targets and activated. Space shimmered as time became unstable. 11 Vaxian command ships aged instantly, their systems failing as centuries passed in seconds. The effect spread outward, catching nearby vessels in temporal distortion. Dozens of ships aged to scrap. The Vaxian formation wavered as command signals disrupted. Ships began making individual decisions instead of following unified strategy. Some continued attacking. Others tried to regroup. A few fired on their own forces by mistake. "It's working," Al-Rashid said. "We're breaking their coordination." But the celebration was premature. The Vaxians adapted quickly, establishing redundant command protocols. Within minutes, they were attacking with renewed focus, concentrating fire on ships that had deployed causality cages. The Revelation, the ship carrying Project 12, took 5 direct hits. Its shields collapsed. Its hull breached in multiple locations. "Revelation is critical," Kim shouted. "They're evacuating." Ishikawa watched as escape pods launched from the dying ship. Dr. Chin was on that vessel. The consciousness virus was on that vessel. If it was destroyed, their final desperate option would be lost. "All ships, cover the Revelation," Ishikawa ordered. "Don't let them finish her." 8 human ships moved to shield the crippled vessel, absorbing fire meant for it. They died buying seconds, their sacrifice allowing more escape pods to launch. But the Vaxians were relentless. A massive energy beam punched through the last defending ship and struck the Revelation directly. The ship exploded, but not before one final escape pod launched, carrying Dr. Chun and the consciousness virus to safety. "Retrieve that pod," Ishikawa ordered. "Get Dr. Chun and the virus aboard the Vengeance." "Captain, we're in the middle of a battle," Kim objected. "I don't care. That pod is more important than this ship. Retrieve it now." The Vengeance maneuvered to the chaos, exposing itself to enemy fire to reach the escape pod. Vaxian weapons struck the ship's shields, draining them. A beam punched through and carved a path to the port hull, killing 43 crew members instantly. But they got the pod. Dr. Chin stumbled onto bridge, his clothes scorched, his face covered in soot. He carried a reinforced case containing the consciousness virus. "Status?" he asked immediately, his voice hoarse. "We're losing," Ishikawa said bluntly. "We've destroyed over 1,000 Vaxian ships, but they still have nearly 3,000. We have less than 200 ships remaining. At current rates, we'll be annihilated in 15 minutes. Chin looked at the case in his hands. "Then it's time." "Are you certain?" Ishikawa asked. "Once we use this, there's no reversal. We will have fundamentally altered an entire species against their will. That makes us..." "Survivors," Chin interrupted firmly. The Vaxians have exterminated 79 civilizations. They've killed trillions. They won't stop until every species in the galaxy is either dead or enslaved. I didn't want to use this weapon, but I want to watch my species go extinct even less. He opened the case. Inside was a single missile, small, unremarkable in appearance. But inside its warhead was computational code more sophisticated than anything ever created. A virus that could travel along quantum entangled communication channels. A virus that would sever the Vaxian collective consciousness and force each individual into separate awareness. How long until it propagates through their entire fleet? Ishikawa asked. Once we infect one ship, the virus spreads to all quantum-linked vessels within seconds, Chin explained. Every Vaxian ship uses quantum communication. They're all connected. That's their strength and their fatal vulnerability. One infection reaches everyone. And what happens to them? They become individuals, separate minds instead of unified consciousness. They'll retain their memories and knowledge, but they'll have to make their own decisions. No more collective intelligence. No more perfect coordination. They'll be confused, frightened, alone in their own minds for the first time in their existence. Ishikawa looked at the tactical display. Another 4 Allied ships exploded. The Vaxians were closing in, about to overrun the defensive perimeter. Do it, she said. Launch the virus. Chin loaded the missile into a launch tube himself. His hands trembled slightly as he entered the arming codes. This was it, the moment that would define humanity's legacy in galactic history. They would either be remembered as the species that saved the galaxy, or as the species that committed the greatest act of forced evolution ever recorded. Missile loaded, he said quietly, targeting the nearest Vaxian command vessel. Launching in 3, 2, 1 launch. The missile flew from the Vengeance, accelerating toward the Vaxian fleet. The Vaxians didn't perceive it as a major threat. It was just one more missile among thousands. Their point defense systems tracked it but prioritized larger threats. The missile reached a Vaxian command ship and impacted against its hull. The small explosive charge detonated. Not to destroy, but to inject the virus into the ship's quantum computational systems. For a moment, nothing happened. Then everything changed. The Vaxian command ship stopped firing, stopped moving, just hung motionless in space. Then another ship stopped, then another, then 12 more, then 100, then 1,000. In less than 45 seconds, the entire Vaxian fleet was dead in space. What's happening? Kim asked, staring at her sensors. They're not destroyed. They're just not doing anything. The virus is propagating, Chin explained, watching his readouts. Every ship is connected through quantum links. The virus is traveling along those links, infecting every computational system simultaneously. But it's not attacking their ship systems. It's attacking their neural connections. It's severing the collective consciousness. On the view screen, escape pod began launching from Vaxian ships. Dozens at first, then hundreds, then thousands. Individual Vaxians abandoning their vessels, fleeing into space in panic. They're experiencing individual consciousness for the first time, Chin said softly. Imagine spending your entire existence as part of a collective mind, always connected to thousands of others, never alone, never singular. And then suddenly you're isolated. Just you, just your own thoughts. No guidance from the collective. No certainty. No purpose beyond what you decide for yourself. It must be terrifying. Ishikawa watched the Vaxian fleet drift helplessly. Ships collided as navigation systems went unattended. Some fired randomly. Their crews apparently trying to fight something they couldn't perceive. Escape pods continued launching by the thousands. Cease fire, Ishikawa ordered. All ships, hold your fire. Captain? Kim looked confused. They're defenseless. We could destroy them easily. We could, Ishikawa agreed. But we don't need to. The war is over. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. All vessels, cease fire immediately. The Vaxians are no longer a threat. I repeat, cease fire. The battle is over. We won. Slowly, the Allied fleet stopped shooting. Ships held their positions, weapons charged and ready to resume if necessary. But the Vaxians didn't attack. They just drifted, their crews struggling with the sudden burden of individual thought. We should finish them, a Krylaxian captain said over the fleet channel, his voice bitter. They destroyed my homeworld. They killed my family. They deserve death. They probably do, Ishikawa replied. But we're not executioners. We fought to survive, not to commit genocide. The Vaxian collective is broken. Their consciousness network is destroyed. They're no longer a unified threat. What they become now is their choice to make. Ambassador Vasquez appeared on the communication screen, calling from one of the core world below. Commodore Ishikawa, we're receiving thousands of distress signals from Vaxian escape pods. They're requesting help. They don't seem to understand what happened. Because they don't, Chin said. They've never been individuals before. They don't know how to function alone. Right now, every Vaxian in that fleet is experiencing what we would call an existential crisis. They don't know who they are without the collective. What should we do with them? Vasquez asked. Ishikawa thought for a long moment. We help them. We bring them to secure locations. We explain what happened. We give them a chance to learn how to be individuals. And then we let them decide what kind of society they want to build. You want to help them? The Krylaxian captain demanded. After everything they've done? I want to prove we're better than they were, Ishikawa replied. The Vaxians conquered because they believed collective unity was the only path to survival. They believed individual consciousness made species weak. Let's prove them wrong. Let's show them that individuals choosing to cooperate are stronger than collectives forced together by neural programming. Over the following hours, the Allied fleet worked to secure the battlefield. Vaxian escape pods were collected and transported to holding facilities on the core worlds. Vaxian ships that remained functional were boarded and deactivated. Engineers examined the virus's effects, confirming it was permanent. The quantum links connecting all Vaxian minds were severed beyond repair. Dr. Markuschin stood in a holding facility, observing through a window as Vaxian individuals sat in confused clusters. They looked lost. Some attempted communication with each other, but they didn't seem to know how to have conversations. They'd always shared thoughts instantly. Now they had to use words. A young Vaxian, its cybernetic body smaller and less augmented than most, approached the window and looked at Chun. Its luminescent eyes showed something that had never existed in a Vaxian's gaze before: fear. Why? The Vaxian asked through a translator, its voice hesitant and uncertain. Why did you do this to us? Chin met its gaze steadily. Because you gave us no choice. You were destroying the galaxy. You had to be stopped. But you didn't kill us. You changed us, made us separate, alone. Yes. Why not simply destroy us? It would have been simpler. Chin was quiet for a moment, because we wanted to prove something. We wanted to prove that victory doesn't require annihilation. The Vaxian collective destroyed every species it conquered. You believe that was strength. We believe that's weakness. True strength is knowing when to stop fighting. True strength is helping your enemy become something better instead of destroying them utterly. The young Vaxian looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. The collective always told us. Now, there's only silence in my mind. Only me. That's called freedom, Chin said gently. It's terrifying at first, but it's also the most precious thing in the universe. You get to decide who you are now. You get to choose your own path. No one can force you to be anything you don't want to be. What if I make the wrong choice? Then you make another choice. That's what individuals do. We make mistakes. We learn. We try again. It's messy and complicated and often painful. But it's ours. Your life belongs to you now, not to the collective. The young Vaxian was silent for a long time. Then, what will happen to us? That depends on you, Chin replied. The Interstellar Assembly is meeting to discuss it. Some species want you imprisoned for your crimes. Others want you scattered across the galaxy where you can't reorganize. But I'm arguing for something different. I'm arguing you should be given a chance to build a new society. A society of individuals who choose to cooperate instead of being forced to. Why would you argue for that? We tried to destroy you. Because I believe in second chances. And because the universe has seen enough destruction, it's time for something new. Over the following weeks, the galaxy transformed in ways no one had predicted. The Vaxian collective collapsed as individual Vaxians struggled to adapt to consciousness. Some adapted quickly, learning to make decisions and form relationships. Others struggled, overwhelmed by freedom they'd never requested. The Interstellar Assembly debated for days about what to do with the former Vaxians. Finally, they reached a compromise. The Vaxians would be given a single world, a planet where they could construct a new society under supervision. They would be monitored for a generation to ensure they didn't attempt to rebuild their empire, but they would be given a chance. Not all species agreed with this decision. The Thalorians, in particular, wanted harsher punishment. But Ambassador Elena Vasquez made a compelling argument to the Assembly. If we punish the Vaxians too severely, we become oppressors ourselves. We fought this war to preserve freedom, not to impose our will on others. The Vaxians were dangerous because they forced their paradigm on everyone they encountered. If we do the same to them, even as punishment, we've learned nothing from this war. The measure passed by a narrow margin. The Vaxians would have their chance. 8 months after Battle of the Core Worlds, Commodore Yuki Ishikawa stood on the observation deck of a station orbiting the new Vaxian homeworld. Below, she could see the beginnings of a new civilization. The Vaxians were building settlements, agricultural zones, educational facilities. They were learning to be individuals. It was slow and difficult, but they were trying. Dr. Marcus Chin joined her at the window. The Assembly approved my request. We're decommissioning all 12 weapons. They'll be placed in a memorial museum on Earth. All of them? Ishikawa asked. Even Ragnarok Strike? That one seems relatively benign. All of them, Chun confirmed. The Assembly decided that weapons designed specifically to break an unbreakable enemy are too dangerous to keep active. They worked too well. They were too devastating. We proved we could build them. Now we need to prove we're wise enough not to use them again. What if another enemy arises? Another threat like the Vaxians? Then we deal with it when it occurs. But hopefully we'll remember the lessons of this war. We'll remember that victory isn't just about destroying your enemy. It's about ensuring the reasons for war don't continue after the fighting stops. Ishikawa nodded slowly. Below, a group of young Vaxians were playing some kind of game. It was chaotic and disorganized. Nothing like the perfect coordination of the old collective consciousness. But they were laughing. Individual laughter, not a collective response. Do you think we did the right thing? Ishikawa asked. Using the virus instead of simply destroying them? Chun considered the question carefully. I think we did the only thing we could do that wouldn't make us monsters. Genocide is easy. It's clean. It's final. But it's also the path that leads to becoming the next Vaxians. We chose a harder path. We chose to transform our enemy instead of destroying them. History will determine if that was wise. And the other weapons? The ones that tear holes in space-time and dissolve matter at the atomic level. Do you regret building them? I regret that we had to, Jim replied quietly. But I don't regret that we did. The galaxy said no weapon could break the Vaxians. We proved them wrong. We built 12 weapons that worked. We saved the galaxy. The cost was high, and the weapons were terrible, but they accomplished what needed to be done. Ishikawa smiled slightly. The Memorial Museum inscription is complete. I saw the final design. It reads, "Built not because we love war, but because we refuse to lose. May they never be needed again." A worthy sentiment, Chin agreed. Let's hope we can live up to it. They stood together in silence, watching the Vaxians below learning how to be free. The war was over. The weapons were being retired. The galaxy could begin to heal. In time, the Vaxians would become full members of the Interstellar Assembly, contributing their unique perspectives as individuals rather than as a collective. They would never forget what they had been, but they would choose to become something different, something better. And humanity, the young species everyone had dismissed as primitive, would be remembered as the species that changed everything, not by possessing the most advanced technology, not by being the strongest warriors, but by refusing to accept that any enemy was truly invincible. They had faced an impossible challenge and met it with impossible solutions. They had built weapons that defied logic and shattered the conventions of warfare. And when victory came, they had shown mercy instead of vengeance. 1 year later, Earth, the Weapon Memorial Museum stood on the far side of Luna, carved into the ancient rock where humanity had first built their desperate arsenal. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see it, to understand what humanity had accomplished in those frantic months when extinction loomed. The museum was designed as a spiral descending into the moon's interior. Each level displayed one of the 12 weapons, along with technical specifications, battle footage, and testimonials from those who had witnessed their use. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through the museum with a delegation of Vaxian representatives, individuals who had volunteered to learn about the war from humanity's perspective. It was part of their rehabilitation, their education in what it meant to be a free species rather than a conquering force. They stood before the Ragnarok Strike launcher, massive, brutal, elegant in its simplicity. This weapon moves at 99.6% of light speed, Vasquez explained. At that velocity, physics becomes your ally. You don't need sophisticated targeting or adaptive warheads. You just need to point and fire. A Vaxian named Kex 7, he had chosen that name for himself only 3 months ago, stared at the weapon. This destroyed our flagship at Saturn. I was on a nearby vessel. I didn't understand what had happened. One moment the command ship existed. The next it was debris. We thought it was some kind of spatial anomaly. It was, Vasquez said, an anomaly we created. They moved to the next level, the Phantom Protocol display. Quantum entanglement, Vasquez continued. 2 particles linked at the quantum level. Detonate one outside your shields, the other inside. The Vaxian shields couldn't defend against threats that were simultaneously inside and outside their perimeter. Another Vaxian, who called herself Mira 9, spoke quietly. I was on a ship hit by this weapon. I remember the confusion. Our shields were active. Our sensors showed no penetration. Then the explosion came from within. We couldn't understand it. It violated everything we knew about warfare. That was the point, Vasquez said simply. They descended to the levels, examining each weapon in turn. The causality cage, which aged ships to dust in seconds. The singularity lance, which bent gravity itself into a weapon. The phase nullifier, which made matter forget how to exist. The absolute anchor, which trapped ships in impossible physics. Each weapon represented a moment when humanity had looked at the impossible and decided to attempt it anyway. Finally, they reached the bottom level, the deepest chamber. Here, in a chamber sealed behind quantum encrypted barriers, was Project 12, the consciousness virus. Unlike the other weapons, this one wasn't displayed openly. It was contained, secured, and surrounded by warning markers in 100 languages. This is a weapon that ended the war, Vasquez said softly. The weapon we swore we'd never use, until we had no choice. Kex 7 approached the barrier, looking at the missile that had changed his entire species. I remember when it activated. I was on a destroyer in the 3rd formation. One moment, I was part of the collective, connected to thousands of minds, thinking in perfect synchronization. The next moment, he trailed off, struggling to articulate the experience. The next moment, I was alone. Just me, just my thoughts. No guidance, no certainty, no purpose except what I chose for myself. It was the most terrifying moment of my existence. I'm sorry, Vasquez said, and she meant it. We didn't want to use this weapon. We debated for months about the ethics of it. But in the end, we chose your transformation over your destruction. I hope that was the right choice. Mira 9 spoke, her voice thoughtful. I hated you for weeks after the awakening. We all did. You had taken everything we knew, everything we were, and ripped it away. But now, she looked at her hands that belonged to her, not to the collective. Now I understand what you gave us. You gave us ourselves. The collective made us powerful, but also made us slaves to a single purpose. Now I can choose my own purpose. I can make my own mistakes. I can be me. That doesn't excuse what we did, Vasquez said firmly. We forced this change on you. We didn't ask permission. We didn't seek consent. We played God with an entire species. That's a moral burden humanity will carry forever. Perhaps, Kex 7 said, but consider this. The collective would have continued conquering until the entire galaxy was assimilated or destroyed. We couldn't stop ourselves. We didn't even understand that stopping was an option. You broke the cycle. Yes, you did it without our consent. But consent wasn't possible. The collective didn't believe in individual choice. He looked at the contained weapon. This weapon killed the Vaxian collective, but it gave birth to the Vaxian people. I don't know if that makes it moral, but I know I'm grateful for it. Vasquez nodded slowly. The assembly debated destroying this weapon entirely. Some argued it was too dangerous to exist, that any weapon capable of rewriting consciousness should be eliminated from the universe. But we decided to keep it secured and contained as a reminder that some weapons are too powerful to use casually, a reminder that victory can come at moral costs that never fully heal, a reminder that we're capable of terrible things in the name of survival. She looked at the Vaxian delegates. Your people and mine will always share this history. We change you fundamentally. We can't undo that, but we can work together to ensure that what we built, both the weapons and the peace, serves as a lesson for every species in the galaxy. What lesson? Mira 9 asked. That there's always another way, Vasquez replied. The galaxy said the Vaxians couldn't be stopped. We found a way to stop you. The galaxy said you couldn't be changed. We found a way to change you. The galaxy said some enemies had to be destroyed. We found a way to transform you instead. She gestured to the museum around them. These weapons represent humanity's refusal to accept the word impossible. But they also represent our willingness to push boundaries that perhaps shouldn't be pushed. They represent our greatest triumph and our greatest moral compromise. So we keep them here, deactivated, secured, remembered, not as trophies, but as warnings. Warnings about the price of survival. Warnings about the consequences of innovation without ethics. Warnings about what we're capable of when we're desperate enough. Kex 7 looked at the other weapons displayed throughout the museum. And yet you share the technology. The Thalorians build Ragnarok strikes now. The Morphians manufacture Phantom protocols. You didn't keep these weapons exclusive to humanity, because hoarding them would have defeated the purpose, Vasquez explained. We didn't build these weapons to dominate the galaxy. We built them to save it. Once the immediate threat was neutralized, keeping them secret would have made us the new threat, the species with weapons no one else possessed. So we shared everything. We gave every species the tools to defend themselves. And then we decommissioned our own arsenal and placed it here in a museum as proof that we meant what we said. We built these weapons for survival, not conquest. They began ascending back through the museum, passing each weapon again on the way up. As they neared the exit, Mira 9 asked one final question. What happens if another threat emerges? Another enemy like the Vaxian collective? Will you build new weapons? Vasquez stopped and looked back at the spiral of chambers descending into Luna's rock. 12 impossible weapons that had changed galactic history. I hope we won't need to, she said quietly. I hope the galaxy has learned from this war. I hope future threats can be resolved through diplomacy, through cooperation, through solutions that don't require rewriting the laws of physics or altering species at the consciousness level. But if we must, Kex 7 pressed. Vasquez's expression hardened slightly, a reminder that she was a woman who had watched colonies burn, who had authorized weapons that violated moral boundaries, who had helped end the longest war in galactic history. Then we'll do what we did before, she said simply. We'll look at the impossible and refuse to accept it. We'll build weapons a universe says can't exist. We'll break rules that everyone else considers unbreakable. We'll do whatever is necessary to survive. Because that's what humanity does. We don't surrender. We don't accept inevitability. And we absolutely refuse to go extinct quietly. She smiled slightly. But we'll do it smarter next time. We'll remember the moral costs. We'll exhaust every other option first. We'll try to be heroes before we become monsters. That's all any species can promise. The museum delegation departed, Vaxian and human walking side by side. Former enemies, now allies in peace. Elena Vasquez stood alone in the museum's entrance chamber, looking at the central monument, a holographic display showing all 12 weapons rotating slowly, accompanied by the names of every being who had died in the war. Human, Delorian, Morphean, Krylaxian, Vaxian, thousands of names scrolling endlessly. The cost of victory, the price of survival. Behind her, the weapons rested in their chambers, deactivated but not forgotten, secured but not destroyed, remembered but not celebrated. They were humanity's answer to the galaxy's greatest threat. They were evidence that impossible was just a word. They were proof that sometimes survival required becoming something you never wanted to be. And they were a promise that humanity would always refuse to accept defeat, would always look for another way, would always build one more weapon, try one more strategy, attempt one more impossible solution. The galaxy had said no weapon could break the Vaxians. Humanity built 12 that worked. But more importantly, humanity had proven that victory was just a beginning, that what you did after the fighting stopped mattered more than how you won the war. They had shown mercy when vengeance would have been easier. They had chosen transformation over annihilation. They had offered second chances to an enemy that had shown no mercy to others. And in doing so, they had earned something more valuable than military dominance. They had earned the galaxy's trust. As Vasquez left the museum and boarded a shuttle back to Earth, she looked out at the stars, at the vast expanse of space that humanity had once been too primitive to explore and now helped defend. Somewhere out there, former Vaxians were learning to be individuals. Somewhere out there, species that had nearly surrendered were rebuilding with hope restored. Somewhere out there, civilizations that had forgotten how to resist were remembering how to fight for their freedom. All because one young species had been too inexperienced to know when they were beaten, too stubborn to accept the inevitable, too creative to follow the rules, and just crazy enough to build weapons that shouldn't exist. The war was over. The weapons were retired. But the legacy remained. And if another threat ever emerged, another enemy the galaxy declared unbeatable, everyone now knew the answer. Call humanity. They specialize in the impossible. For more such thrilling science fiction stories, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Starborn Tales.